efficiency that we have since solved, which is nice, but it took some time. It was really hard.
Well, and from a business owner, especially a small business, it's really difficult to get those things done because those things don't necessarily make you money right away.
Right.
And then you start to grow, and the more you grow, the more confusion it creates. And that's where job dissatisfaction comes into place, because people are confused about their job responsibilities. And then, the employer or the manager is upset with people for not doing their jobs, and it becomes a mess.
And it was. It truly was. And now it's not anymore. The last couple of years, we've really gotten it rolling, but it was not easy. And you basically just described what happened with our organization. So, thankfully we continued forward and it didn't consume us and collapse us. But yeah, those micro details really do matter. They do. And it takes time. I think that's why a lot of people don't own their own businesses.
And I think too, going back, even if we get a little bit away from like the business, setup and perspective, but taking in some of the clinical skills that we know and applying those, we're really good at applying those with our clients, but we forget to do that with our employees, right? And by employees, I mean, I can specifically talk about my supervisees because that's kind of where I'm functioning, but really making sure that we are functioning as a reinforcer for them, that we've established rapport. And again, like linking those reinforcers to their job performance specifically. So look, you just did this, and being very specific about, providing that specific praise for their performance on those things. And then, just other clinical things like you talking about the jackets. So what we would do is a preference assessment, right? I mean, we do that with clients. What do you want to work for? Or, the little guys that we're working with, do you want the Oreo or do you want the Cheeto? So do you want the sweatshirt or do you want the hat, right? So kind of, remembering to use those skills that are so ingrained in us as clinicians and applying them to our employees too, because oftentimes we, or supervisees, we forget about them. We lose the sight.
We do. And there's a phrase, two phrases really describe the same thing: parallel process and isomorphism from systems training. Parallel process loosely is whatever's happening in your client's life sometimes manifests itself in the session, and vice versa. So if the client is really struggling at home with spouse, it'll present as a struggle with the clinician. And in isomorphism, to use a fancier term, is when it happens in supervision, allegedly. It's the same thing. But we want to be mindful that we're really just being consistent too, because the same struggles that can pop up in a clinical setting can pop up in a personal setting, can pop up in a parent-child setting. And I love that you mentioned, like, get a survey done, see what they want first. And all I'm thinking is like, but then it won't be a surprise. It takes the romance and the excitement out of it. But you get happiness. And I think when you are transparent and you invite people to collaborate in the process in getting whatever it is that they want, and you offer many options, the closer you get to what it is that they want with as many options as possible, the happier you're going to end up being. And then who cares about the romance at that point? You've gotten joy, right? Because you got what you wanted. And I'm hearing some parallels too. And I want to hear you talk about this with between what we do with children to shape behavior and what we do with adults to shape behavior, and even organizations and even governmental structures, right? So what are some of the fundamental, I guess, tools or strategies or philosophies that are universal in those applications? Molly's smiling. You can't see that because you're staring at the back of the screen.
It's like the back.
Yeah. Well, we could go through the basics. Reinforcement is the best one that everybody likes to talk about. Now I can't see you guys anymore.
That's because I only bumped the camera and turned it off.
Yeah. So every organism contacts reinforcement, right? Bridge, can you see me now?
I can.
Punishment exists in the natural environment as well. And, punishment happens whether it's intentional or not. Things that look like punishers to one person might not be a punisher to another, and vice versa. And things that look like reinforcers to one person might actually function as a punisher to another person. So that's where those, the surveys we were talking about are really important. When we're working with individuals, whether they're children or adults, we conduct preference assessments frequently. And so for individuals that might not be able to speak, we set the occasion so they're likely to indicate in some other way that they're interested in whatever the object or activity is. With, individuals in the workspace, They can answer a survey. They can do it in person. They could tell you. They could do it anonymously. We actually use a tool frequently. I think it's called Office Vibe. It's a free survey tool for organizations where our staff are regularly telling us things, and it asks random questions. So they get it kind of takes a temperature check on how they feel about things. And then we could throw in some questions sometimes. So we're able to identify what we're doing is, and we think we're delivering, the reinforcers we think we're delivering are actually functioning as such in that way.
Are those anonymous?
Yes, they are anonymous.
And I think
when you could actually
go ahead, Molly.
Oh, I was just going to say, just to give another little plug for that thing, you can respond and communicate with the individual comments, and the individual can continue to respond anonymously if they choose to.
And what's
pretty cool? Office Vibe. Oh. You could pay for it depending on the number of employees you have, but there is a free portion of the service.
That's cool.
I think one of the important principles that Molly just pointed out too really is that reinforcement, right? And so establishing that, what we call motivation, or that motivating operation. And that's really the importance of these preference assessments, right? Because we could have the perfect treatment plan or the perfect behavior plan, but if that client, child, individual, whoever it is that we're working with isn't motivated, it's going to fail.
Sure.
Right. And so making sure and ensuring with, that process and that procedure that we've got something that's going to motivate them for change, essentially is what we're talking about, change in behavior. Is vital.
There's a lot of stuff I want to cover, but for right now, I think I just want to hover right where you are, which is on the motivation component. So often we see parents bring their children into treatment, and it's like, here, fix my kid. And that doesn't work. We know that systemically it doesn't work. We have to get the parents on board, because they, as the executives of their home, as they go, so go the children. So there's no fix my kid. We don't treat individuals in a vacuum. That's not how this works. But secondly, the kid doesn't know why they're there. And oftentimes we, as the adult clinicians in their life, can be viewed as yet another person telling them what to do and how to do it. Mm-hmm. How do you work through both those things when your realm, as opposed to my realm, if I can separate them a little bit, yours is so much more science-y than ours, which tends to operate in the theoretical realm. It seems like it would advertise itself well to parents to be like, okay, you guys can fix my kid. You're the behaviorist. Just shape their behavior. And we know that's not how it works. How do you help train parents to understand that?
Well, I won't speak to the parent training necessarily at this point, but the way as a therapist you start would be to gain the learner's consent or assent. Not consent, because those are two different things, but gain their assent to being there with you and to interacting with you and to developing a trusting relationship. And for each individual, that's going to look very different. I have my favorite little guy that had autism. I shouldn't say he's my favorite client, but this piece was my favorite thing because I'd never seen it this exaggerated before. When we would work with him, he would just avoid anything that had to do with us. So we'd walk into a room and he'd be playing with the toy, and we'd sit next to him and he would take the toy away. So if you followed him and tried to touch the toy, he'd drop the toy and move on to something else. His favorite candy, his favorite cookie, he'd keep moving on and moving on. So what we realized is we just had to sit there and wait for him to approach us. And it took for what felt like forever, but we got that assent. Once we were able to get that, we were able to get to know who he was as an individual. And then be able to implement our treatment plan, but we had to be able to get his assent. Sorry if you hear kids screaming in the background, that's my 3-year-old. But once he started to give us assent, we were able to identify what his reinforcers were, because he was showing us those things. Then when it comes to the parents, though, you have to kind of get them to be there too. They have to be willing to let their child tell them what they like, instead of only directing their child on what they should be doing and shouldn't be doing. And it's a shaping process. It could take a long time. It could take a day. It really just depends on the dynamics with each individual and their family.
A couple of things I'm really happy to hear you say is all of that, because it aligns, but also that your child is screaming in the background, because if we were at my house, the same thing would probably be happening. It's almost like you should get a clinician in there to solve that. Totally kidding.
I agree with Molly. And I think in terms of like the parent perspective, what I have found probably most effective, clinically speaking, is to really find what's of value to them in terms of change. Well, of course, you've got that whole rapport building piece, right? So you're going to try to establish rapport and I think oftentimes it may be different for us because our interventions are implemented in the home. So it's not, oftentimes individuals aren't coming to us. We're either working with these children in their homes or in the school setting or wherever it may be that we're employing these. It's not office.
I did not know that. I thought that was the exception to the rule.
There are centers as well, but there's a huge component of, generalization and maintenance in those home and, other environmental settings. So we can see that expansion of the skills. And so it is a little bit more intimate, obviously, because we're entering into those environments and those settings, but it also allows us more time with, speaking whether it's a teacher we're training or a parent, it allows us more time to actually establish that rapport and work with them in that specific setting.
Right.
And I think that's, it's really effective. But then again, going back to the values, trying to put yourself into their worldview and find things that are of value to them. Of course, oftentimes, and I'm sure Molly could say this too, we get this lengthy list of things, right, that is wrong with this child or target behaviors. And so really just what I do is find the one that's the most frequent and probably the easiest to target and do that, because that can sell the science to that teacher or to that parent much more quickly. And then they start to kind of buy into, to the treatment and what we're doing, and they become that much more engaged. And so that's kind of, the avenue I've gone. Typically, parents will get, toileting, eating, sleeping, those things are really difficult, right? My child doesn't speak, those sorts of things that they really have control over. But if there's something in there, just following simple directions, well, how about we work on this? And then they see it and they see the change, and then we can easily bleed into those other, more difficult realms.
I don't think we like to think of ourselves as salespeople, but there is a sales component to this wherein you want to invite them back by showing them the proof and also enticing them with, there's more to come, because I think a lot of times people will come into, I don't know about a lot, but sometimes people come into therapy of any kind and they don't get instant results because we live in this like pill driven instant gratification society. And, if you didn't solve the screaming in one session, then I'm not going to come back. So we want to invite them back in with, hey, there's more to this, right? Not just, hey, be patient.
I think that's one of the caveats that I always use. I don't know if you do this, Molly, but with every teacher, every parent I work with, that first session is always, there's a warning. This is going to get worse before it gets better. So you just got to prepare yourself for that and be ready to ride out that wave, to kind of help, fight that magic wand. Sometimes it does happen, right? Sometimes that magic fairy does pop up and we do see like really great behavior change really quickly. But often we have to prepare them to kind of ride out that, because we're changing the environment, we're changing things, and kids will go back, kids, adults, whoever, again, once it is we're working with, will go back to those behaviors that were more functional for them in the past. And they will try every single thing to make sure that, again, that going back to your point of consistency, that we're going to consistently implement that intervention. And then we'll see that, performance change.
Yeah. My good friend and mentor, Christian Conti, has the 4 C's of parenting. He calls them his choices, consequences, consistency, and compassion. And I always want to add a 5th C, which is credibility, because if you don't have consistency, you lose credibility, and then the kids don't listen to you. But he says, I talk to people and they'll say, yeah, we tried that consistency stuff. It didn't work. He's like, well, if you tried it and quit, that was not consistent. So there's a real buy-in here where we almost have to sell people on the idea that like, this isn't a one-time wrench torque. It's like, this is a lifestyle change now. You have to embrace the idea of, shifting your behaviors away from everything that you thought you knew, including stuff that you maybe grew up with. So we may be undoing 30 years worth of habit here, just to help get kids, aligned. What were you going to say, Molly?
No, I was totally agreeing with you. And one other piece, and this isn't always effective, and not that it's not effective, but it doesn't always happen, is I really try to get my parents to take data on whatever the behavior is. And I say this doesn't always happen because sometimes it's just too hard for the individuals, the parents. But if they start to track the data themselves, the behaviors themselves, then they start to see that difference. Even those minuscule differences, that gets buy-in. Like, okay, my kid was screaming 20 times every day. Now maybe I hear it 5 times. It's still aversive, it still happens, but it's not as bad. And I think seeing that slight change is really important too.
It's super important, and we don't do that enough in my clinical realm. The talk therapy profession, we don't ask people to track their behaviors often enough, and I think we should, because